Hi guys, we now start the introduction to the book Reclaiming Hindu Temples by Dr. Chandni Sengupta. It starts with the great Sanskrit mantra, may everyone be happy, may everyone be free from all diseases, may everyone see goodness and auspiciousness in everything, may none be unhappy or distressed. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And then it has a quote from the Surah An-Nisa 476. Those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of Taghut. So fight against the allies of Satan. Indeed, the plot of Satan has ever been weak. Then we have a quote from the Surah Al-Baqarah 2:193. Fight them until there is no more fitna, and until worship is acknowledged to be for Allah. The Muslim invaders who ravaged our temples and looted our idols were imbued with a spirit of iconoclasm, a natural phenomenon which was part and parcel of their socialization. They were taught through the injunctions of their faith that idolaters need to be put to the sword and that Islam needed to be established in all the lands that they set out to conquer. There was therefore something inherent in their faith which made them so vehemently opposed to the people of other faiths. Their opposition was not restricted only to the idolaters, but also the people of all other religious denominations, and numerous churches and synagogues were destroyed by the Islamic expansionist armies in the Middle East and other parts of the world. It is interesting to note that Christianity and Judaism are also Abrahamic faiths, but even they were not spared by the invading armies of Islam. In Iran, they persecuted the fire worshippers, who were then forced to flee. In Bharat, they mounted serious injury to the socio-religious fabric, which was greatly altered as a result of their advancement into the mainland. It is therefore important to analyze the history of Islam and its downright denunciation of other belief systems. The condemnation of idolatry was propagated by the Prophet of Islam. The pre-Islamic Arab society consisted of idol worshippers who were polytheists. Allah was the supreme God, but every household had their own deities, and every region was associated with the worship of a deity, and at Mecca, the most important deity was Hubal, an idol made of red cornelian. In pre-Islamic Arabia, there also existed the practice of goddess worship, and the three daughters of Allah, Al-Lat, Al-Uzza and Al-Mannat, were worshipped by the people of Mecca. The people of Yathrib, later known as Medina, also had their own duties, both household and community ones. Apart from the deities worshipped by the tribes, other religious denominations also found a place within the religio-cultural structure of Arabia. There were Jews and Christians. In fact, Medina had a large Jewish population, and in Eastern Arabia, Christian influence was immense. In the pre-Islamic period, Arabia was, therefore, a cosmopolitan region with diverse communities and religious influences. The socio-cultural fabric of Arabia was overturned by Muhammad, who lived from 570 CE to 632 CE, who claimed to have received a revelation from Gibril or Archangel Gabriel in 610 CE, after which he began professing a new faith and started winning over adherents. Muhammad, who belonged to the Banu Hashim clan of the Quraysh tribe, claimed to be the, quote, messenger of God or Allah, unquote. And within a few years, he had acquired the complete loyalty of a small group of Meccan followers who had accepted his religious ideas, which were centered around the belief in one God and the rejection of all deities and idol worship, But Parasti. The established religious norms of Arabia were condemned as shirk, idolatry and polytheism, condemned by Muhammad. This group of adherents to the new faith established by Muhammad came to be known as Muslim, that is, to those who had submitted to Allah, and the religion came to be known as Islam, which meant submission. Scholars have tried to portray Muhammad as someone who wanted to unify the divergent tribes, but this unification was accompanied by gross bloodshed of those who did not want to abjure their faith. The religious beliefs of Muhammad were opposed by the tribal chieftains at Mecca, who considered these beliefs to be outrageous and implausible. Muhammad's own tribe, the Quraysh, was opposed to his religious ideas. The situation in Mecca had become unfavorable for Muhammad, who decided to shift to Medina with his band of followers in 622 CE. In Medina, he became an arbitrator of tribal disputes and gained some popularity. Within a couple of years, he began waging wars against his own tribe, who he now considered to be quote-unquote pagan idol worshippers. The Battle of Badr, 624 CE, and the Battle of Uhud in 625 CE were wars fought by Muhammad in order to convert Arabia into quote-unquote the land of Islam. Later, Muhammad entered Makkah, destroyed all idols housed in the Kaaba, and established his rule over the region. The destruction of idols was a key feature in the aggressive campaign led by Muhammad. As Islamic conquests spread beyond Arabia, the decimation of idolatry became a prime objective of the armies of Islam. Under the Rashidun Caliphate, that is the Caliphate of the rightly guided, as well as these caliphs had been associates. The Rashidun Caliphate is Caliphate of the rightly guided, as all these caliphs had been associates of Muhammad. That's why they were the rightly guided. Their significant territorial gains were made by the Arabs, including Persia, Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. The indigenous religions of all these regions were ousted, and Islam was established by force in these areas. Under Caliph Umar, the second Rashidun Caliph, inroads were made into Bharat, and the region of Balochistan was Islamized. Usman, the successor of Umar, wished to take over more territories in the region, which was referred to as Al-Hind by the Arabs. The Islamic caliphs were therefore always on the lookout for territorial expansion, and Bharat, which was a land of spiritualism, enormous resources, and wealth, became an obvious target. As advised by their prophet, the Muslims had to kill the polytheists, who were called mushriks, and bring an end to shirk. The Arabs, who invaded Sindh, and the Turks, who later invaded the Indian mainland and devastated our country, were imbued with the iconoclastic spirit of their prophet. The Arab conquerors overran Sindh in the 8th century, perpetrating heinous acts of violence against the Hindus and Buddhists of the region. After the Arab episode, Bharat had to again face the wrath of the Islamic marauders in the 10th and 11th centuries. This was followed by the establishment of Islamic rule in India in the 12th century. The entire period of Islamic rule witnessed enormous death and depredation. This phase of Islamic dominance was an era marked by the presence of regressive practices, prudery, and incomprehensible hatred towards the Hindus. Scholars in the past have tried to legitimize Islamic hegemony over Bharat by trying to project these sultans as progenitors of quote-unquote useful institutions and harbingers of change. The kind of narrative that has dominated the historical discourse over the years has shrouded the imagination of most people with regard to the actual nature of Islamic rule in Bharat. The initial phase of history writing witnessed the influence of the colonial school of thought and the nationalist historians. While most of the colonialists tried to project everything associated with Bharat as backward and degenerate, some of them were absolutely correct in their assessment of India's glorious ancient past, followed by a period of dark age. A section of the colonial historians who espoused Orientalist beliefs emphasized the need to delve into the ancient past of India, and they also attempted to create a link between Sanskrit and classical European languages. They definitely had a larger colonial agenda in mind, but what these Orientalists also ended up doing was to revive our interest in our own ancient past. They also presented a systematic critique of the Islamic rule in India, which, according to them, had plunged India into an era of doom and devastation. The colonial historians were followed by historians belonging to the nationalist school of thought, who presented a correct narrative on Indian history. They analyzed the ancient and medieval periods and highlighted the striking contrasts between the ancient period and the medieval period of Bharat. Scholars like R.C. Majumdar presented the unerring picture of Islamic rule in Bharat. These nationalist historians did not shy away from calling a spade, and they did not gloss over the crimes and injustices of the sultans and later the Mughal rulers. The nationalist historians rightly considered the Muslim rule in Bharat to be a foreign, alien rule which was a period of degeneration and oppression for the Hindus. However, some historians like Tarachand and Muhammad Habib focused all their energies on trying to project a cultural synthesis that had, according to them, occurred during the medieval period as a result of the Islamic invasions. The works of these historians tended to justify the Islamic rule in India. Habib went as far as claiming that the Turks initiated the process of urbanization and provided opportunities of upward social mobility to the menial castes, particularly the artisans and laborers. Habib and those who followed his analysis focused on the inherent problems within the Hindu social order, which enabled the Turks to win over converts to Islam, thereby diminishing the idea of forced conversions. The theory postulated by Habib served as a background for the Marxists, who used his analysis of upward social mobility to assert their fundamental belief that Islamic rule over India was actually a good one. In the 1950s and 1960s, the Marxist school of thought gained momentum, and a host of Marxist historians began to present their views on Indian history. Many of these historians began to write about the Sultanate and the Mughal periods, and their analysis was marred by a lopsided narrative of presenting the Islamic rulers as messiahs of quote-unquote justice and righteousness. Historians like Satish Chandra attempted to justify Islamic rule in India by trying to highlight some institutions that were set up by the sultans and the Mughals. He also focused on the measures adopted by some of these rulers, for instance, the market regulations of Alauddin Khalji, in order to legitimize their rule in Bharat. According to Chandra, the Muslim rulers gave Bharat what the Hindu Rajas could not. He also harped upon the presence of Hindus in the courts of sultans and Mughal emperors, thereby attempting to present a picture of secularism and tolerance during the medieval period. Working within the Marxist framework, some historians became popular for their analysis on destruction of temples. Romila Thapar was one such historian whose work on the desecration of the Somnath temple became the textbook for next generation Marxists. Discounting the accounts of chroniclers and other works as exaggerated, Thapar tried to turn the attention on the wealth of Gujarat, which according to her was the prime mover for Mahmud of Ghazni. She, however, did not present any logical and conclusive argument on why the temple was destroyed if only looting of wealth was the purpose of the invader. Why did you want to destroy it? You could have just ran away with the fucking gold. Why did you have to destroy the temple? He could have as well raided the docks where items of trade were stocked. After all, they were the actual sources of wealth. For Thapar, the Turks were not iconoclasts, neither were they invaders. They only came to India in search of wealth. Her erroneous theory did not, however, provide any answer for the rampant desecration of temples, forced conversions, and massacre of Hindus. The agenda-driven histories written by Thapar and her ilk tried to present the Islamic invaders as mere adventurers who plundered and raided places in order to obtain reserves of wealth. What these historians, however, purposely did not look were the gruesome brutalities perpetuated by these marauders on the indigenous inhabitants of Bharat. Western scholarship has also been dominated by the Marxist narrative, and scholars like Richard Eaton have presented a false theory of only 80 temples being destroyed during the entire Islamic rule. Eaton also focused on the protection provided by some Muslim sultans to temples as well as the reconstruction of a few during the Muslim period. His argument is largely based on a preconceived notion of Muslim rulers being benevolent. An analysis of historical sources, both contemporary and works written later, do not corroborate Eaton's theory. In fact, these sources are filled with instances of sultans and Mughal emperors destroying temples and raising mosques in their stead. Thapar and Eaton have also focused on the destruction of temples by Hindu Rajas in order to justify the demolition of our holy spaces by the Muslim invaders. They have purposely tried to build a narrative around the fact that some Hindu kings destroyed temples during the situations of conflict with other kingdoms. This, however, does not absolve the Muslim invaders of their cruel misdemeanors. More recently, historians like Audrey Truschke and William Dalrymple have tried to project Muslim rulers, particularly Aurangzeb, as protectors of a composite culture. And New York Times genocide data says Aurangzeb killed 4.6 million Hindus. Their fallacious theories have been widely broadcast and have become the dominant narrative as far as the history of Muslim rule in India is concerned. Such skewed theories have captured the minds and hearts of scholars in India, as well as Western universities, and Marxist historians are responsible for deeply entrenching such falsehoods. A significant departure from the dominant Marxist discourse was made by historians like K.S. Lal and the renowned archaeologist B.B. Lal. While the former focused on the political theory of the Muslim rule, the latter proved through archaeological excavations that numerous temples were buried under mosques constructed during the Islamic rule. The truth written by these historians irritated the Marxists, who had successfully spun a web of lies and popularized it for years. Professor B.B. Lal's efforts have been finally recognized by the government, and he has been conferred Padma Vibhushan in January 2021. Yet another doyen of nationalist thought who wrote elaborately on the regressive impact of Islam on Indian society was Sitaram Goel. He was an intellectual warrior who did not mince his words when it came to exposing the hypocrisy of the Marxist writers. His work, Hindu Temples, What Happened to Them, was particularly ridiculed by Marxist scholars for obvious reasons, and many of them blamed him for presenting an exaggerated account of the destruction of temples. However, this work is considered to be a path-breaking work as far as the history of temple desecration in India is concerned. Marxist historians have, however, completely denounced their works and branded these historians as rabid Hindu fundamentalists. The reality of Islamic rule in India is far removed from what has been projected by Marxist historians. Their manifesto has largely focused on a single-point agenda, that is, to project the Muslim rulers as compassionate, saint-like creatures bereft of any iconoclastic tendencies. Historians like Thapar have purposely overlooked the religious references mentioned in numerous historical sources in order to present the Islamic invasions of India, first by the Arabs and then by the Turks, as a secular venture which had, according to them, nothing to do with religion. Persian scholars have themselves mentioned these invasions as holy wars. Biographical accounts of some of the invaders have also mentioned jihad as the main objective behind these invasions. However, Marxist historians have nullified these references as exaggerations and attempts to win over the confidence of the caliphs. The mention of holy war is proof enough of the fact that these invaders were keen on obliterating the infidels, something that the Marxist historians have, unsurprisingly, overlooked. The truth is that Muslim marauders engaged in savagery wherever they went. Historical sources are brimming with examples of the vicious brutalities perpetuated by them on the Hindus. The Hindus had to bear the brunt of Islamic invasions since the 8th century, when the zealot Muhammad bin Qasim overran Sindh and Multan and destroyed numerous temples and massacred countless people. The defacement and desecration of Hindu idols and the levelling of temples to the ground was a project that was carried forward by the Turks who came from Ghazni. So much of Hindu blood was shed and so many temples destroyed that it is impossible to provide an estimate of the numbers. Eventually, the Turks established their rule in Bharat and laid the foundations of what came to be known as the Delhi Sultanate. From its very inception, this Sultanate was an Islamic theocracy that did not believe in according equal rights to the Hindus, who were considered to be zimmis, or protected subjects on whom unjust taxes like the jizya were to be levied. In fact, according to Imam Hanfi, the founder of the Hanfi school of Islamic jurisprudence, extracting jizya was a substitute for death of the infidels. So, pay jizya or get fucked. So, if the infidels could not be killed by the sword, they had to be bled dry by the pressure of this oppressive tax, which is why the poorest of the poorest Hindus converted to Islam and who are the Pasmandas of today. The iconoclastic vision of the Islamic invaders found expression in rampant destructions of temples from Kurukshetra to Somnath and from Mathura to Ajmer. The armies of Mahmud Ghazni and Muhammad Ghori destroyed everything that came in their way, and from temples to women, nothing and no one was spared. The rule of the first slave dynasty, that is the one set up by Ilbari Turks, witnessed horrific acts of violence against the Hindus. Numerous temples, including the Mahakaleshwar temple at Ujjain, were demolished. The Khalji rule was yet another phase which was marked by countless instances of temple destruction and humiliation of Hindus. The infamous Alauddin Khalji, who has been a much celebrated monarch for the Marxists, for the market regulations introduced by him. So, Alauddin Khalji controlled the free market, that's why he's a hero. He was actually a zealot who took immense pride in abusing and degrading the Hindu faith. During his Deccan campaigns, many temples were desecrated. He was the second invader to set his eyes on the Somnath temple in Gujarat, which was destroyed on his orders. The Tughlaq dynasties also converted many temples into mosques, particularly the eccentric Muhammad bin Tughlaq and his successor Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who was famous for his bigoted ideas. Innumerable temples were broken on the instructions of these sultans, and in their places, mosques were built. Examples of this come from different parts of the country, from north to the south. Their fanaticism was truly limitless. The Tughlaq dynasty received a blow due to the invasion by yet another maniacal invader, Taimur, Saif Ali Khan's favorite leader and king. It is interesting how celebrities in India name their children after these marauders who brought death and doom upon our country. Taimur's invasion weakened the Sultanate and led to its gradual erosion, which ultimately led to the rise and development of regional sultanates. These political units that sprang up in different regions were the result of rebellions staged by local governors. Marxist historians have called these regional kingdoms as quote-unquote centers of cultural efflorescence. However, a deeper analysis of historical sources, both textual and archaeological, pertaining to these regional sultanates point to the abject disregard for Hindu institutions, including temples. Evidence of defilement of temples abound as far as these regional Muslim dynasties are concerned. Islamic rule over Kashmir led to severe negative consequences on the region. The large-scale massacre of Hindus and the vandalism of temples became an established norm during the reign of Sikandar Shah Mir, who became popular with the epithet Butshikan, or the slayer of idols, because But literally means idols. The Lodi sultans, who built their dynasty in North India in the 14th century and continued to rule till Mughal zealot Babur arrived on the scene, also followed a policy of hate and humiliation against the Hindu population. Sikandar Lodi was particularly harsh in his attitude against the Hindus. The development of a syncretic culture during the Delhi Sultanate has been a much debated and contested theme in Indian history. Nationalist historians have rightly pointed out that with the coming of the Islamic invaders, Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism received a setback due to the zealotic nature of these conquerors. Marxist historians have, however, tried to project this period as a period in which a syncretic culture developed. They have deliberately focused on the non-existent assimilation of Muslim culture within the socio-cultural fabric of Bharat. There were no Muslims before they came. How the fuck did assimilation of different Muslims happen? The fact remains that no such assimilation ever happened. In fact, the Sunni sultans who created the Delhi Sultanate did not even tolerate the Shias, leave alone the Hindus. There was absolutely no place for dissent in this realm of intolerance. Anyone who questioned dogmas was persecuted, and hence there is no reason to believe that these holy wars actually wanted to assimilate into the society. Many temples that were destroyed by these invaders were rebuilt due to the efforts of the Hindus. The Somnath temple of Gujarat, which was repeatedly attacked by marauders, was reconstructed in the post-independence period and now stands as one of the most magnificent religious structures in the country. Similarly, many other temples like the Mahakal temple in Ujjain were also rebuilt. However, some temples were lost forever. The building materials of temples that were used to build mosques could never be deciphered. The pillars of these mosques and other architectural features bear testimony to large-scale destruction of temple structures. The Quwwatul Islam Mosque in Delhi, the Adhai Din Ka Jhopra in Ajmer, the Adina Masjid in Bengal in Malda, and the Atala Masjid in Jaunpur are only a few examples of mosques that were built by using materials from Hindu temples. The Adina Masjid was actually known as the Adinath temple, which is why they named it Adina Mosque. There are numerous examples of establishment of such mosques throughout the length and breadth of the country. There is much debate in contemporary times about whether or not the Hindus are right in attempting to undo the historical wrongs that have been committed since centuries. There is absolutely no doubt about the fact that during the medieval period Hindus were subjected to blatant humiliation. Our religious identity was targeted by the invaders who proposed to convert their subjects to Islam. Their design of forced conversions was successful to a large extent. Iconoclasm was their primary tool for denigrating the Hindus of Bharat, and they used it freely. It is therefore imperative to create an understanding about the true nature of the Islamic rule and its repercussions. History writing needs to make a shift from falsehoods to reality.